Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and I'm so thrilled to be hosting today's conversation all about the Amazon Prime series LulaRich. We are joined today by wonderful executive producers Blye Faust and Cori Shepherd-Stern. And the first thing I wanted to talk about is it sounds like there were always two versions of what this series could be. And one was if you had Deanne and Mark, who were the heads of LuLaRoe, as part of it, as participants, and one version if you didn't. And obviously, we know that they ended up sitting down, that they ended up being part of the film as well. But what was that version initially in development looking like if they hadn't participated? And what were the differences in the way that you would have narratively told the story?
Well, we were going to do it regardless of whether we got Mark and Deanne, of course. But, they came on very early. So there wasn't really like a deep two version, look at how this could go, because we did sit down with them right up front in the process, which was amazing, surprising. But it definitely, and I think one of the things that's really important for us, and it's the same for Cinemart, is that anytime we're doing these projects, that we really get that 360 story of, and we want everybody to come on who is involved and tell their version of the truth. And we will pass it on to the viewers and let them be the ones who decide what they think the whole truth is. So yeah, obviously, I think we felt like we would make an even better documentary if we had Mark and Deanne, and it seems like it definitely has paid off. So.
It has, and I forget who it is from the creative team that kind of described the tone of the series as Nicole Kidman's performance in the movie To Die For, where there's comedic moments, but there's always kind of this undercurrent stirring within and a little bit of darkness if you peel back the layers. What was kind of the moment where you realized what the tone of how the story was going to be told within the documentary was going to be, and that it was going to land on those very specific beats?
So I think we knew immediately, just having from when we found the story and started really diving in to see what's going on here. I mean, there were these news pieces, and there was, there were certain members of the of the company and some former retailers who had gone on to speak, either whether it was in print or kind of some short form interviews. And it looked like there was a lot of smoke. And when there's a lot of smoke, there's usually fire. And so it was just, even the stuff that was out there was, it was compelling, but there were these absurdities about it too, which, when we first saw it, you can't, surely that cannot be true. That can't be real. And so we knew that we really wanted to be able to capture that tone. And so we reached out to Jenna and Julia. They were the first and only directors that we called as soon as we knew we wanted to do this story, and they signed on right away. I mean, and based on Fire Fraud, we knew that they would be able to capture this tone. How could you do this story without having capturing the levity and the absurdity too? And so yeah, that it was made for them.
And in interviewing, like doing the pre-interviews with the characters, I mean, I got on the phone with Daryl, for instance, and like instantly, like who Daryl ended up being in the documentary is who he was on the phone in that first intake call. And like hearing his story and like these from every character, their own personal drama and what was at stake for them, and just the humanity in that, like, and how all of these calls added up to something larger, I think really speaks to like what your question was, which was, so it was so much about these, like the individual characters, the absurd details, but also like what it added up to, which I think Cinemart, Jenna and Julia, and then Mike Gasparo, a fellow executive producer, like were just perfect in capturing all of that.
With a lot of those pre-interviews that you were having with participants in the documentary, what were some of the storylines and threads and narrative elements that ended up in the series that you discovered even during those pre-interview processes? Because there is a vast amount of research, but there's also a lot of really personal elements that come into the way that the story is told as well.
Well, I'll never forget doing Lachey's intake call. Like, never. I was like furiously typing that thing up to share with the rest of the team. But, the detail of her starting her first day at LuLaRoe and wearing Chanel, and then Deanne personally taking her to the warehouse to redress her in LuLaRoe was like gold. And, the same thing with, Daryl's details about, Kelly Clarkson. And I mean, some of the like meme worthy moments, were absolutely in those early intake calls. And, I'm so grateful to all of those people for sharing their stories with us, just all the way through the process.
And I would add one other thing too that became real, like on the flip side too, when we were speaking to people early, is, and this wasn't totally captured, I think, in the stuff that was out there publicly at the time. It was a little bit, but really, truly, how deep it went in terms of how much their lives had often been ruined in terms of their families and with their marriages and financial security and all of that. So it really, and they opened up and were very, very forthcoming, and oftentimes really broken up. And that was something that really hit us hard early. And it was really apparent that this was, that there are true repercussions.
For sure. I think especially with like Courtney Harwood, and she was really brave in sharing her story. And a lot of people, have come out, and mentioned her a lot in terms of like what she lost, how high she was up in the company, and then how far she feels like she fell. And that was, that intake call and talking to her on multiple occasions, and Blye and I having conversations about it, and being worried about like, is this going to, and people recounting this stuff, is this going to be damaging to them? Is this going to, how are they going to feel? Are they going to be re-traumatized? And really taking into account like our responsibility, and having those conversations very early with Cinemark, with the directors and Mike, about how to handle this so that we are doing good all the way through the process, that we're not, causing more harm.
And because, there were literally thousands and thousands of people who were retailers for LuLaRoe, what was the journey of finding who were ultimately going to be the participants within the series? Was it to do with tapping into that online community that existed and really seeking them out, or more of kind of like a call out of, if you want to share your story, if you want to talk to us for this project?
Well, it wasn't a call out, because we were really, working hard to kind of keep the wraps on certain things. And so we definitely, through the, finding people online, that Facebook group was invaluable. And, I think people say about Becca Peters, not all heroes wear capes, superheroes wear capes. That's completely true. And hearing stories from other people, like, we would talk to Roberta, and Roberta would be like, you have to talk to Daryl. And Daryl would say, oh, you got to talk to Lachey. Like everyone knew someone else that we really needed to talk to. And so that's how we found a lot of people. It was just referrals. And then also our team did a huge, really huge shout out to the Storyforce team, because they worked really hard to go online and watch every piece of video that they could. And so they found some of the most, amazing people just through like this really, searching every corner of the internet for who might be out there.
But as well as that Facebook group that eventually existed, where people were sharing their complaints about their experience with the company when they were trying to break ties with them towards the end, like you said, there's so many online videos that people were doing, so many Facebook Lives that happened, so many, because the company was encouraging people on social media. And then you also have a lot of details, like all of the information and depositions from the lawsuits that have been filed against the company as well. And so what was that initial space of really looking at such a hugely broad spectrum of research material, and then trying to figure out, along with the directors, how to narrow it down, and what were the pieces that ultimately could fit into and worked with the story that you all wanted to tell?
Yeah, there was a plethora of social media, of videos and clips and everything to pull from. It was a massive trove, it's gold, obviously, for documentarians, for us. And we sifted through a lot of it. We used a lot of it. There's a lot that stayed on the cutting room floor that we would have loved to be able to use. And it was a huge team effort and process. The spreadsheets and, the logging of all of this is, it was hundreds of hours of, if not thousands of hours of work for a lot of people. So it was an ongoing process that we had to go through. But we were really just lucky to have so much to work with at the end of the day. And it would be fun. It would be really fun if we could go do a bunch of outtakes too, It just can't make it up. I mean, we've seen, anyway, it was just so much fun. Some projects they're serious and they're important, but there really isn't that levity. I got to tell you, we've chuckled the whole way through, though, looking at all the interviews, the depositions in their entirety themselves. I mean, they are entertaining in their own right, and it's not homework. You really could watch them all on their own, and not be bored one bit. It's pretty remarkable.
And that goes back to the Cinemart, to the directors and producers over at the Cinemart, and just how excited we were to see that we had made the right decision in taking the story to them, because they, unerringly picked the best stuff, what fit in perfectly. We were thrilled, and like Blye said, it was a treasure trove, but it was huge. So it was a big job, and they just were champions.
I encourage anyone who really wants to see the depositions to FOIA the Washington State Attorney General's office and get the full depositions, and you can sit down and over popcorn and eat, and it will be a great viewing night. Yeah.
How many hours of them are there?
There are several, because there's a number of people who were deposed, even who weren't included in the documentary as well, too.
Put on your old leggings and get the popcorn out. And, because of all of the lawsuits that have been taken out against the company, and there are certain ones like the Washington State one, which I believe, was settled. There's certain individual cases that have been settled, but there's also still a huge amount of legal proceedings which are ongoing for this company at the moment. And so in telling the story, did that create any restrictions in ways that you had to approach, even just the language and the way that you describe it, the fact that you have to constantly refer to it as a multi-level marketing company? It has been accused of being a pyramid scheme, but that hasn't necessarily been proven in court. So are there dances that you had to play with language like that at all?
I think it's not a dance in terms of publicly. It is what it is, right? And I think we're not making any legal conclusions. Certainly, that's not our job. Our job is to put out there what the facts are, what the truth is, and let the attorneys and the attorney generals conclude what they may. And so they're a multi-level marketing company who has been accused of being a pyramid scheme. I mean, that's all true. And they settled with the Washington State Attorney General's office, and hopefully there'll be more attorney generals across the country taking up the Washington State office, what they started, and we'll see what comes of that. And yeah.
And I wanted to jump back to talking about the pivotal interview with Deanne and Mark, because I think it was the directors mentioned that there were role plays that took place before those were filmed in order to play out different potential scenarios and how they might respond to some of the questioning. And so what did a lot of that role play look like, and what were some of the things that it really helped to flesh out for everybody going into those interview tapings?
Cori, you want to go ahead and take that one?
To completely honestly, the directors are, they have done this before when they, were with Fire Fraud and Billy McFarland, and they have like a pretty in-depth creative process that we were, excited to follow along with. And in terms of like how they work together, I mean, they're just such an interesting combination of, themselves. I mean, Jenna and Julia are just like this dynamo creative team. And I think it's interesting that we do have, one female director and one male director. And those crucial interviews, it was a woman and a man. And so I think that, Julia is able to give insight on, what if this happens from her point of view? And then, Jenner, who honestly is an honorary woman at this point, because he always comes from a place of like equality with gender, which I love about him. I think that they were just able to, kind of try to get into the heads of these people and really, I think first and foremost, because they are so interested in really hearing, really listening to what these people have to say. I think that they create this space to allow someone to really just tell their story. And that's what we got with Deanne and Mark. They really just opened up and told their story. And you can see that there's no like fancy editing or gotcha, or, it's just honestly, when you hear that story about Deanne with the mom raining the money down, and, that's her story. And Mark, when he chokes up about his dad, never wanting to make $400, like that's his story. And, when you play it out against the larger story, it puts it into a context, that tells a larger story. But I think that's really what so much of it was about like, okay, let's, let them tell their story. And they were open, and they did it in that interview.
And we get really great raw moments, even at the very beginning. The first time that we meet them is before, they're officially rolling, but the cameras are already on, and we get to see them kind of settling in. And then you also, that tactic is employed with other people throughout the series. So we get these really beautiful off the cuff moments. But like you said, we see that dynamic is still there the moment that they are kind of like on for the cameras as well. What was the point where everybody realized that there was a real beauty to including those little off the cuff moments as lead into interviews?
That's just something that's like part of Jenner and Julia's. I think it's kind of like a little bit of a signature that they do. And really with this too, because it was so important to capture who these people really were. And this is a story too about people who are saying oftentimes one thing and perhaps something else is going on behind the scenes. So there's a little bit, it kind of thematically plays into that as well too. Like, who are you when you're off camera? Who are you in the dark? That kind of stuff versus, who are you when you're, talking publicly and putting some out there for, for public consumption. So it really actually played nicely into what this really was about at its core too.
And with that idea of something being said and something else going on beneath the surface, that's one of the interesting dynamics of watching their relationship on screen as well. And, you have Deanne being like, oh, I wasn't sure what was going on. I wasn't really going to the meetings. I was just there kind of helping out. And you're like, she's actually the entrepreneur that started it all. And it was her business acumen that created the initial concept and the initial idea for everything. And so that there's a lot of savviness and business, in a businesswoman beneath the surface as well, that she's just not necessarily always admitting to. What was kind of like the first moment where the two of you started to really get the essence of what their relationship dynamic was with each other? Because it's also very interestingly traditional in a lot of senses in terms of the gender roles between the two of them.
I think for sure there's, Deanne and a lot of, these women, there's been some really interesting think pieces coming out about like the Mormon community and Mormon feminism and what this looks like. And I mean, we see this a lot in different projects that we are interested in and that we work on, is like, how do women within the constraints of whatever society or culture they are in really reach for their own ambition and their own creative fulfillment and their own, like their dreams. And you can see that with Deanne. I mean, she's very much traditional in a lot of ways, and very much like a mother of like so many kids, and yet, also the, creator of this enormous company, and how she chose to do that hand in hand with Mark. And I think that's a question, right? It's really interesting. So many people are like, wait, is she super ditzy and he's in charge, or is he like subservient to her? And like, I think that's something that's fun to think about and talk about when you see it, like what I think, we had looked at a lot of material on them before the interviews, and you can see it in the doc and the material that we included, where she's like on camera directly talking to her retailers, directly talking to her consultants, and telling them, you got to do this, you got to do that, you got to move, hire somebody if you need to, whatever. I mean, that is not someone who's like, I don't know what to do with my company. I mean, that's a like force. And she, I think that we kind of knew that up front, like this, it doesn't come from nowhere. It doesn't just happen.
And with those videos that they would make to retailers, some of them get fairly dark later on as well, where they're trying to put the blame on all of the retailers, and they're saying, if your business isn't working, it's nothing to do with us. We're not sending you products that are incorrect. It is all on you, and really placing the blame on them. Were those types of videos something that they really only started delivering later on, or were there kind of like elements that you could kind of see and hints of it in some of the earlier videos that they made for retailers?
There was just a different escalation as things went on, and when things started to hit the skids in the company and things started to go wrong, you can really kind of chart that. You can feel that, and the pressure started to kind of creep up. So yeah, I mean, they were always pushing from the get-go, always. They were, sell. It's, it's on you. You make of this what you will. But certainly the tone did start to change when things were starting to get difficult for the company, when the retailers were leaving, when all these lawsuits were happening, when the Washington State Attorney General office stepped in, when they had all these complaints of these defective products. It was, I think, becoming a little less fun. Everyone loves it. When things are going well, it's that great, buzzy, fun ride. And when things just start to fall off the rails, everyone gets a little cranky, and you can see that.
When things are going well, it's just a Katy Perry concert for everyone.
Exactly. 100%. Yep.
Katy Perry's.
The girl who kissed a girl. Oh no, we can't have that. Yeah.
And, there are some fairly nefarious moments within it, even from the early stages of telling women to sell breast milk to cover startup costs. And then you have the elements of pushing women into weight loss surgery later on. At what point in the development or filming of the project did you start to discover some of the aspects like that?
We got those in the intake, in the early conversations, and in some of, definitely in the early conversations. We were hearing from, the people who were in the documentary talking about it. We heard those stories, and I was like, oh my God, like it just gets crazier, and when we heard the breast milk story, I was like, wait, what? There was so much wait, what in the intake calls, in those early pre-interviews with people. So we got a lot of that early.
I also imagine that the post-production on this was incredibly in-depth and meticulous with a lot of, I'm not saying, because even going back to what you were saying, Cori, earlier about how them both talking about elements from their childhood. And then when we look at that in context of what the company became and why certain aspects existed the way that it did. And there's a lot of moments like that, what, cutting from a moment in a deposition where they're claiming one thing, and then you have footage that, immediately contradicts that from one of the retailers. And so was it kind of very clear cut in terms of figuring out this is going to be the overall structure and this is episodically what each one is going to look like? Or was it a lot of really just taking the material and making kind of a large master cut and then really finessing and figuring it out from there?
So I will say, first of all, that we worked really closely with Amazon to figure out the structure, and our experience working with Amazon and that team is hands down one of the best experiences we've had with an executive, creative executive suite. They were unbelievable in their feedback and notes. And so we talked a lot about the structure, and really, I think the hardest ones for us, ultimately, we played a lot with were the structures of episodes 3 and 4. 1 and 2 were a little bit more, sure, there were notes and we had to move a little bit around, but really trying to figure out 3 and 4 as we built to that crescendo, how we were going to work in the depositions and other stuff and the lawsuits. And at what point, were we going to bring the lawsuits in and really focus on them? So that was the biggest part, but this project moved so quickly. We met and Cinemart started the process sometime, I can't even, I'm kind of losing track of time, but it's like
18 months.
Yeah.
Beginning to end from the time
it was breakneck, during the pandemic, shooting this and editing it. So it was pretty incredible how quickly it all came together.
Yeah. Isn't it something like you were only shooting with Mark and Deanne something like this August even, and then it was within the space of a month or two, the entire thing was pieced together as well?
It was last year, actually. Yeah, it was last year that we were shooting with them, and we really moved super quickly. I mean, from the time that we met Cinemart. I mean, what's funny is we just got back, we had dinner with Cinemart and the Amazon team. And it was the first time we've all met in person. Like, we met Cinemart, had a phone call online, did a Zoom, like pitched the show, all agreed to do it, then pitched it to Amazon, sold it, made it, delivered it, everything. It premiered, and we had never even been in the same room. So that was pretty remarkable, what you can do during, a pandemic. And it was a really fast turnaround, and everyone worked really hard. And we have to give huge shout out to the incredible edit team and the incredible post-production team and the incredible production staff. I mean, this was really, it was one of the most remarkable production experiences I've personally ever had. So we huge gratitude to
they
that.
worked around the clock. I mean, really, truly, and just killed themselves. Yeah.
When you take a step back and look at the arc that this company had, and the fact that a huge amount of their kind of rise upwards was timed to like 2012 onwards, and economically, societally, what was happening, you know, that's the country coming off the back of a recession, that's people feeling betrayed by large corporations and large companies, and so the opportunity to be given this autonomy over your life and your career in a different way. You think, in having worked on this, that part of the success of the company was so specifically based on the timing of when all of that happened? Or do you think that it's something that, you know, another company could turn around and mirror exactly the same thing and have that exact same trajectory today?
Oh, I think it definitely had to do with the timing. And it also, I mean, and there were these weird, interesting other like larger factors, which, I mean, the body positivity movement, you know, suddenly you had, you know, clothing that, you know, all size women could fit into and, you know, feel fashionable in. And, you know, it, you know, so it was that combination of all the factors you talked about, and then coming together with, I mean, Facebook Live, you know, like that was the main way that people were selling clothes, and kind of that, and everybody coming online at the same time of that, you know, particular audience. And it was just this like huge kind of convergence of like the perfect storm. I mean, there could be something else that plays into that same thing, but, you know, hopefully we might have you know, shine enough of a bright light on the MLM structure that people will think twice about it, or at least their family members will maybe like try to stop them and say, hey, watch this before you go sign that paperwork. But yeah, I think for sure it was it's a really interesting case study, and like what were the factors that were coming together all at the same time that led this to be just this massive phenomenon.
And for both of you in working on this project, what did you find to be the really specific and unique challenges of this project versus all of the other stories that you've told?
So, one of the things was to get people to actually share their stories, right? And this is typical of a lot of the stuff that we do, because sometimes we're bringing forth stories and projects that are based on true stories, and true stories of people who were marginalized or silenced and harmed in some way. And oftentimes they feel really alone. And it's the David and the Goliath of it all. So a lot of people that we reached out to were really afraid of going on and speaking on camera, because for whatever reason, legal reasons, emotional reasons, the fear of like going on and getting bullied online and attacked for something that they had really had a lot of trauma around, and were finally at a good place in their life and just didn't want to dig all that back up and re-enter that crazy sphere. And so that's something I think that to get the people who went on were so brave to do it, and just put themselves out there, and to be so raw and vulnerable and just completely share their truth. And there were so many who would love to, but were terrified. And so were instead really helpful for us behind the scenes, and giving us leads and tips, and connecting to us to other people. So that was one of the things I think that was, just getting people to the table was an enormous, feat in and of itself. But at the same time too, once the series came out, we also had a lot of those people calling us back and saying, thank you so much. It turned out so amazing. If you're going to do any more episodes or another season or any of that kind of stuff, please let us know. We're all in. And I think it's something that we've seen this with other projects of ours too, whether it's Spotlight or others, where people really felt so alone. And then something like this, comes out, whether it's film or television, and they realize that they're one of many, and they have a whole community who had the same shared experience. And that then all of a sudden that just renewed, the feeling that they can come forward and speak their truth and be emboldened to do that. It's pretty remarkable. So I think that personally for me was the biggest sort of arc, if you will, of the journey for so many of these people.
And what was it for you, Cori?
I think it was the same thing. I mean, it was, for me, this all kind of started with my mom when I was a kid. She was a single mom, and she sold pink makeup. I don't know how to say that. She had a big pink suitcase that she tried to sell makeup and try to support our family that way. And she had been so ashamed when that failed that, you know, that it was the pink suitcase of shame that sat in her closet for years. And so when we were doing these intake calls, the early intake calls with, you know, some of these women, and there was so much shame, and they wwere so, you know, just, it was very painful. It was very painful for them. And like, I felt for them. I totally knew it. And I shared my mom's story with them. I was like, you know, I get it. You know, but we're hearing this over and over again from other people. And they had found community through their Facebook groups and through, you know, a lot of the activism that like Roberta Blevins has done, you know, but at the same time, it was within the community of, you know, LuLaRoe, you know, the defectors, and it hadn't been public. And to think like, okay, this might be this like big thing that's seen, and it has been seen all over, you know, was really scary for a lot of them. And yeah, it was absolutely, there was a lot of silencing. People were really afraid. I mean, Deanna and Mark were seen as, you know, within that community as like, you know, huge figures, larger than life. I mean, Deanna and Mark, and it was a big deal. And so to say that you're going to publicly come out in this documentary, and they didn't know how it was going to go. And you know, at one point, you know, people got afraid that the word got out that Deanna and Mark were interviewing with us, and people got afraid, like, oh wait, is this some kind of trick? You know, did you know, almost like, are you employed by Deanna and Mark? Is this like some trick to get us to talk? And you know, that was hard. I mean, there were like frantic late night phone calls of like, wait, what are you doing? Who are you really? You know, that kind of thing. And it was heart-wrenching. Like, no, we're legitimate. This is what's going on. And yeah, it's that, I think, was the biggest thing. I completely agree with Blye.
I think both of you and the rest of the team have done such a wonderful job in the way that you told this, because it is something that is, you know, what we were talking about at the beginning, it is really enjoyable to watch, but in every single moment, the more you peel back the layers, it never shies away from that undercurrent of everything else that's going on beneath the surface. And that's why it works so well as such a great piece of complex documentary storytelling. So congratulations to both of you. And thank you so much.
Thank you
for having us. Yeah.